The desert that remembers rivers. The wind over the Gobi carries a sound older than time, a rasp of sand against stone, a dry whisper crossing a continent that once knew rivers. Today the Nemegt Basin lies barren, a sweep of ochre dunes and pale rock beneath a relentless sky. Nomadic herders still move across it, their felt tents crouched low against the gusts, their horses threading narrow paths between ancient outcrops. The ground seems empty, silent, but each gust uncovers fragments of another world, the bones of giants who once waded through forests where now there is only dust. 72 million years ago this was no desert. Imagine instead a web of rivers snaking through a warm, humid floodplain, its channels splitting and rejoining, its banks alive with vegetation. The Nemegt Formation was a living tapestry of forests and swamps, its canopy woven from conifers, ferns and flowering trees whose ancestors still cling to parts of Asia today. Monsoon rains fed as an intricate network of deltas, and sunlight shimmered on broad, slow-moving streams that never slept. Here, every branch was a boundary between predator and prey, every pool a mirror of survival. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments. In those days, the air carried not dust but sound, the thunder of herds crossing mudflats, the low murmur of reptiles sliding into water, the crack of giant trunks breaking underfoot, the scent of resin of wet soil of life in excess. This was the world long before deserts. Before humanity, a land where adaptation was law and beauty had teeth. For paleontologists, this landscape is both a treasure and a time capsule. Its sandstones and clays preserve the traces of an entire ecosystem frozen in transition, a place where rivers once braided through forest, depositing layers that hardened into rock and memory. The Gobi's dryness, though brutal to the living, became a gift to the dead. It sealed their remains with wind and time, creating one of Earth's richest fossil libraries. Each bone, each imprint of a leaf or footprint is a syllable in a language we're only beginning to understand. But to grasp what those fossils whisper, we must first unlearn what we think we know about deserts. The Gobi is not barren, it remembers. Beneath every dune lies a record of abundance, each grain of sand a sediment washed down by ancient rivers that once nurtured the world's last great dinosaurs. What we see now is only the afterimage of that Eden, a mirage built from extinction and endurance. From a distance, the Nemegt looks lifeless. Yet under the sun, its colours shift subtly pink to copper gold to bone white, revealing the outlines of ancient riverbeds. Geologists read these patterns the way historians read ink on fading parchment. In the gentle slope of a ridge or the twist of a sediment layer, they see the signature of a vanished current. Where the rock thickens with dark clays, they find evidence of floodplains. Where it grows coarse with gravel, they trace the footprints of streams. The fossils emerge along these lines, not randomly, but precisely where the water once paused, as if the land itself still remembers where life gathered to drink. And gather it did. Long-necked sauropods browsed the treetops while duck-billed hadrosaurs grazed along riverbanks. Packs of feathered predators stalked the shadows while pterosaurs wheeled above like silent kites. The earth trembled with their passing. Yet within that chaos there was order, each creature playing its part in a delicate rhythm of growth, decay and renewal. The modern Gobi hides these rhythms beneath its silence. But to the trained eye, even the quiet is eloquent. The shapes of cliffs mimic the channels of vanished rivers. The dust that stings a scientist's face was once the mud under a sauropod's foot. Every expedition into the Nemegt is a dialogue between present and past, between the bones we find and the questions that survive them. One such question defines the journey. How could such a lush river-fed paradise transform into one of the harshest deserts on Earth? The answer lies in deep time. After the age of dinosaurs ended, continents drifted, climates cooled, and inland seas dried. The same tectonic forces that raised the Himalayas drained the life from this basin, turning its forests to dust and its rivers to mirages. The bones remained entombed in the sediments they once helped create, waiting for human hands to brush them free. When paleontologists first arrived in the early 20th century, they described the experience as walking through a battlefield frozen in amber. Fossils lay exposed at the surface, gleaming under the sun as if freshly unearthed. Skeletons of creatures long vanished, giant herbivores, toothy predators, eggs clustered in nests, all waiting in the silence of a world without witnesses. The Nemegt Formation was not just a discovery, it was a revelation. It showed that deserts too can be storytellers. As the camera lingers on a skull half buried in sand, we begin to hear the faint echo of water. Slowly the dunes dissolve, replaced by green light and flowing streams. Dragonflies as long as a human arm hover over reeds. A herd of duck-billed dinosaurs wade through flooded meadows, their calls reverberating like brass instruments across the valley. In the shadows a tyrant stirs. The Age of Giants returns. The film's journey begins here, where silence meets memory, and where every grain of sand remembers the river that once passed over it. To tell the story of the Nemegt Formation is to tell the story of transformation, how life adapts, how worlds die, and how the Earth in its patience keeps every secret until someone listens closely enough to hear. Bones in the sand, maps in the sky. The Nemegt is more than a graveyard, it's a diary written in layers of stone. Every ridge, every band of colour in its cliffs is a sentence in the story of a vanished ecosystem. To the untrained eye, the landscape looks chaotic, a jumble of dunes and broken rock. But to a geologist or paleontologist, it is ordered, precise, a coded archive where rivers, floods and droughts left their signatures for those who know how to read them. In the language of the Earth, the lines that stripe the cliffs are not decoration. They are time itself stacked in slow motion. Each layer represents a pulse of water, a shift in wind, a season of death or renewal. Paleosouls, ancient soils now hardened into rock, mark long intervals of stability when vegetation flourished and roots tangled in damp earth. Their rusty reds and ochre tones reveal oxidation under open-air proof that life once breathed here. Above them lie lighter, coarser sands, the channels of old rivers where floods tore through the forests, sweeping away carcasses and trees. And between these extremes are the grey, fine-grained mudstones, quiet floodplains where silt settled, in still water wrapping bones in gentle sediment and sealing them away for millions of years. Together these layers form a topographic fingerprint of a living world. By tracing their thickness, their texture and their chemistry, scientists can reconstruct a vanished climate with near-poetic precision. Carbon isotopes whisper the humidity of an ancient summer. Mineral grains record the direction of an extinct current. Even the colour gradient from brown to yellow to white can tell whether the air was rich in oxygen or dust, whether forests burned or grew, whether the sky fed the rivers or withheld its rain. To excavate here is to navigate both time and space at once. A paleontologist's map is not drawn on paper, but in the mind a three-dimensional atlas that connects each fossil to its layer, each layer to its season. A femur half buried in sandstone tells of a flood strong enough to carry a carcass downstream before burying it. A clutch of eggs resting in fine clay reveals a nesting site left untouched long enough for sediment to gently encase it. Even the smallest clues a mark, a root trace, the angle of a grain can change the narrative of a species' life and death. Overbank mudstones, the soft grey sheets that cap many Nemegt ridges, are the most generous storytellers. They formed when rivers burst their banks and spread sediment across the plains like a thin blanket. Within that blanket lie footprints frozen mid-stride, delicate leaf impressions, and the faint outlines of raindrops. Each microfossil is a heartbeat evidence that this was not just a place of extinction, but of motion, of weather, of breathing worlds. It's humbling to realize that what we now call formations were once living landscapes, not static museums, but dynamic theaters of evolution. In the Nemegt rivers didn't merely sustain life, they sculpted it. Each season redrew the geography, forcing animals to migrate, adapt, or perish. Floods carved new channels, trapping the slow and feeding the swift. Droughts withered forests, leaving only the hardiest species to endure. Life here was not gentle, but it was relentless, a constant negotiation between abundance and absence, and yet the same chaos that destroyed also preserved. When the rains returned, carcasses buried under silt were spared from scavengers, their bones sealed beneath anaerobic mud. Over eons, minerals replaced marrow, turning flesh into fossil. Layer after layer, year after year, the land built its own archive, a stratigraphy of life and loss. To those who walk the Gobi today, this may seem abstract, but picture a team of scientists kneeling at dawn beneath a wall of striped sandstone. Each line on that wall is older than humanity itself. With a brush, they expose a fragment of bone gleaming like ivory against red rock, the boundary between the living past and the observing present. It is both archaeology and astronomy reading constellations not in stars but in strata. The Earth, like the night sky, is full of patterns waiting to be interpreted. This is why paleontologists often say they read rocks the way historians read texts. The Nemegt sediments are paragraphs, its fossils are punctuation marks. Flood channels are exclamation points, sudden violent interruptions. Paleosols are quiet pauses, commas between epochs. Each boundary layer is a turning page. Over millions of years, the river rewrote its story again and again, and the Earth has always kept the drafts. Even the direction of the dunes tells its tale. Wind-scoured crossbeds show where ancient breezes once drifted eastward. Their geometry mirrors ripples left by shallow water, the same patterns you might see in sand at the edge of a modern stream. Only here, the ripples are stone, their motion long since ended. To touch them is to touch a fossilized moment of movement, a gesture of time itself. When modern researchers fly drones over the Nemegt, their cameras capture more than erosion. They capture history drawn on a continental scale, a map of vanished rivers carved into the bones of the Earth. From above, the landscape resembles the veins of a leaf branching, looping, feeding life and reclaiming it. It's no coincidence that the Mongolian herders who still cross these lands navigate by the same ridgelines that once guided dinosaurs to water. The shape of the Earth remembers paths long forgotten by life yet preserved by stone. As the sun sinks and the cliffs glow like embers, one can almost see the ghosts of rivers gleaming faintly through the haze. Silver ribbons threading through memory. The Nemegt is silent now, but its strata speak in the patient grammar of geology, a language of cycles and endurance. To read it is to see that even extinction leaves handwriting. Here, bones are not relics. They are coordinates markers on a map that connects sky, soil, and time. To follow them is to trace the logic of the planet itself, that every death feeds the record of life, and every layer of sand is one more line in Earth's long autobiography. Saurolophus by the Green Water. The first sound of morning in the ancient Nemegt was not the roar of a predator, it was the low resonant bellow of a Saurolophus. Deep and hollow, it rolled through the mist like the call of a ship in fog echoing across the floodplain. In the soft light of dawn, the herds were already awake. Hundreds of duck-billed dinosaurs, adults and juveniles alike, moved in coordinated rhythm along the river's edge, their shadows long and wavering across the water. Saurolophus was one of the most successful herbivores of its age, a creature of grace and cooperation in a world dominated by claws and teeth. At 43 feet long and weighing up to 12 tons, it was both massive and oddly gentle a herbivore that thrived not by speed or armor, but by unity. Its world was ruled by rivers, and the herds followed their banks with the same precision that wildebeest and caribou follow their migrations today. Where the waters flowed, the Saurolophus gathered. Its most distinctive feature, the tall, backward-pointing crest rising from the back of its skull, made it an icon among hadrosaurs. For decades, scientists debated its purpose. Was it decorative like a peacock's tail, or functional like a brass instrument of bone? The leading theory today suggests both. Inside the crest ran hollow tubes connected to the nasal passages, a natural resonating chamber. When air passed through them, it produced a deep trumpeting sound that could carry for miles. A single note could summon a mate warning of danger or maintain cohesion across the shifting terrain of the floodplain. In life, these calls would have formed a language of low thunder, a chorus of frequencies too deep for smaller predators to fully detect. Mothers might have recognized their young by tone alone. Males during mating season could have competed in sonic duels, their crests vibrating like living horns. This was communication before speech music born from evolution. The herds grazed near the green waters, stripping ferns, horsetails, and soft conifers with broad duck-like bills. Behind those bills lay batteries of hundreds of teeth constantly replaced, designed to grind vegetation with the efficiency of a combine harvester. The edges of the river were lush and dangerous. The best feeding grounds were also where predators waited. But Saurolophus had numberness on its side. A single adult could fend off smaller carnivores with a kick or tail swipe, but their true defense was the herd itself. When danger approached, the outer ring of adults faced outward, while the young clustered in the middle. Movement within the herd was synchronized, almost choreographed. Fossil trackways from the Nemegt and neighboring formations show parallel prints, entire family groups moving shoulder to shoulder across mudflats, leaving behind the record of social instinct as tangible as any skeleton. The younger Saurolophus likely spent their early months in nesting colonies similar to those of modern seabirds. In some formations, paleontologists have uncovered fossilized nests and eggs attributed to hadrosaur. Relatives evidence that these dinosaurs returned to the same sites. Generation after generation, their migration cyclical, their memory of the land astonishingly precise. In the Nemegt, where the rivers rose and fell with the monsoons, timing was everything. The herds had to arrive just as the vegetation peaked too early and the plants were unripe, too late and the drought would close in behind them. Evolution sculpted not just their bodies but their calendars. In these vast assemblies, hierarchy must have ruled. Older males, scarred and massive, likely led the crossings. Females, cautious and deliberate, tended to the young. Their eyes, positioned high and to the sides, gave them panoramic awareness, an essential gift in a land where danger could emerge from forest or water alike. Even their sense of smell was refined, tuned to detect the faint musk of predators like Tarbosaurus from afar. The crest, bright and ridged, might also have carried colour. Some paleontologists speculate it was sheathed in keratin like a rooster's comb, vibrant reds, yellows or blues shimmering under the Cretaceous sun. During the mating season, the floodplain would have been alive with display crests, raised bodies, swaying tails, beating the ground in ritual patterns. Courtship was not just visual or vocal, it was seismic. Yet life by the water demanded constant vigilance. The same river that nourished the herds could betray them in an instant. Sudden floods driven by distant storms swept across the plains without warning. More than once, a herd may have been caught mid-crossing, their massive bodies overturned by the current, their remains buried together in the sediments that now form the Nemegt cliffs. It is within such layers that paleontologists have found clusters of Saurolophus fossils' bones aligned in the same direction, a silent echo of tragedy preserved by time. To walk among their resting places today is to stand in the aftermath of both life and catastrophe. The bones are large, weathered smooth by millions of years of wind, but the arrangement still suggests motion, the same motion that once rippled through herds under a Cretaceous dawn. Every fossilized rib, every tooth is a remnant of an animal that lived by patterns of water and rhythm, whose survival depended on cooperation and timing. In the greater story of dinosaurs, Saurolophus is a reminder that dominance isn't always measured in teeth or speed. Sometimes it lies in harmony and the ability to move together, to communicate, to endure. These duck-billed giants ruled their world not through violence but through unity, adapting their lives to the pulse of the rivers that sustained them. As the sun rises higher, the herd moves inland, leaving trampled reeds and swirling eddies in its wake. The sounds of their calls fade into the distance, blending with the hum of insects and the distant rustle of trees. And for a brief moment the Namek breathes again, not as desert, but as sanctuary, alive with the rhythm of a world that no longer exists, yet still whispers beneath our feet. The strangest giant Dinosaurus. For half a century, Dinosaurus was a ghost. In 1965, a team of Polish-Mongolian paleontologists uncovered two enormous arms in the Nemec Basin, each over 8 feet long, tipped with sickle claws the size of sabers. The rest of the skeleton was missing, and for decades the creature became a riddle. What kind of monster could wield such limbs? Some imagined a predator rivaling Tyrannosaurus, others a strange giant herbivore. For years, Dinosaurus existed only as legend, a name that meant terrible hands and a mystery waiting to be completed. When the full skeleton was finally discovered in 2014, the truth stunned everyone. The terrible hands belonged not to a predator, but to one of the strangest omnivores that ever lived. Dinosaurus was a paradox on legs, a mix of traits so unusual that it seemed as though nature had built it from spare parts. It stood as tall as a small house, nearly 36 feet long, and weighed up to 7 tons. Yet for all its size, its head was narrow and toothless, ending in a broad duck-like bill. Along its spine rose a towering sail of elongated neural spines, giving it a humped, almost camel-like profile. It was neither predator nor grazer, but something in between, an evolutionary experiment that defied category. Dinosaurus belonged to the ornithomimosaurs, the ostrich dinosaurs known for their speed and their grace. But unlike its sprinter relatives, Dinosaurus was built for patience, not pursuit. Its legs were strong, but not swift, its body massive, its claws blunt rather than blade-like. It didn't chase, it searched. In the wetlands of the Nemegt, it waded through shallow water using those enormous arms to rake through vegetation and sift for food. Inside the stomach cavity of one specimen, scientists found an astonishing mix: smooth gastrolith stones swallowed to grind tough plants alongside fish bones and scales. It was a clue to its eclectic appetite. Dinosaurus was an omnivore, a forager of everything the floodplain offered. Soft water plants, ferns, fruiting, shrubs, fish, and even the occasional carcass left by predators. In a world of specialists, it survived by refusing to specialize. Its bill, shaped like that of a duck, was not designed for tearing, but for scooping. With each sweep through the water, it likely trapped aquatic plants or small prey, much as spoonbills and herons do today. Its long arms, ending in shovel-like claws, might have been used to pull down branches, dig for roots, or drag clumps of vegetation from the shallows. The sail on its back, once mistaken for armor, may have served as a thermal regulator, absorbing heat in cool mornings and releasing it under the punishing sun. Some researchers believe it could also have been a visual display, a billboard of color and pattern visible across the plains, signaling dominance or readiness to mate. To see it move was to watch contradiction come alive, a creature both awkward and graceful, lumbering through mud yet perfectly balanced in its element. Its wide, flat feet prevented it from sinking into the mire, while its long neck gave it reach across reeds and rippling pools. Where carnivores relied on ambush and herbivores on numbers, Dinosaurs relied on adaptability. In an ecosystem where drought could strip the land bare and floods could drown, the unwary versatility was survival. And yet for all its size, Dinosaurus was no invincible giant. It carried scars, bite marks on bones, gouges from predators who tested their luck. Tarbosaurus, the apex hunter of the Nemegt, would not have ignored such bulk. But attacking one came with risk. Its claws, though not razor-sharp, could deliver devastating sweeps. Its sheer mass could crush smaller foes underfoot. Paleontologists often describe Dinosaurus as slow but unassailable, a creature that did not flee but simply endured. The wetlands it inhabited were alive with tension. Along the river channels, hadrosaurs grazed and pterosaurs skimmed low for fish. Crocodile-like amphibians lurked in the shallows. Every life form here occupied a delicate niche, each depending on the rise and fall of the river. Dinosaurus thrived in the liminal spaces, not the deep forest, not the open plain, but the margins where land and water met. These were the borderlands of survival, and the strange giant ruled them quietly. Imagine the sight: a herd of Dinosaurs moving slowly through the mist, their sails glowing in the sunrise like lanterns. Each step ripples the mirrored surface of a flooded meadow. They pause to feed, to scoop, to drink. The air vibrates with the distant calls of Sorolophus and the faint beating of pterosaur wings overhead. Somewhere beyond the reeds, the sound of a distant predator echoes, but the giants pay no heed. They are too large to fear, too slow to run, too content within the rhythm of their world. To scientists today, Dinosaurus is more than a curiosity. It is proof of how evolution experiments without prejudice, how form follows opportunity, not expectation. It reminds us that survival does not always belong to the fastest or fiercest, but to those who can adapt, who can find abundance in chaos. For millions of years, Dinosaurus lumbered through the wetlands of the Nemegt, a living contradiction of grace and absurdity. Its bones now rest in the same mud it once stirred, its mystery finally solved, yet its strangeness endures. In a landscape where every creature fought for a place, this gentle giant found its own path, quietly reshaping the rules of life along the river's edge. A storm clears, scent of an opportunity. The storm had come and gone like a heartbeat of the planet, a deafening surge of rain, wind and lightning that turned the plains of the Nemegt into a trembling ocean of mud. Now silence. The clouds were drifting apart, their bellies bruised purple, letting shards of sunlight pierce the haze. Every surface steamed tree trunks, reeds, and the dark hides of dinosaurs slick with rain. The air was heavy, rich with scent and electricity. To some, it was renewal. To others, it was invitation. From the edge of a rising bluff, the Tarbosaurus lifted her head. She stood still, the tip of her tail twitching in rhythm with her breath. Droplets of rain clung to the ridges above her eyes. Her nostrils flared, the air carried the perfume of fresh water, and something else, something alive. Beneath the softened ground, the smell of overturned soil mingled with musk and damp vegetation. Somewhere ahead, something large had passed recently. She moved forward with practiced patience. Each step was deliberate weight distributed along the broad pads of her feet to muffle sound. The world around her was alive with the aftersong of rain frogs, croaking insects, droning the faint buzz of unseen wings. But to Tarbosaurus, these were background noise. Her attention was tuned to the pulse of scent, the faint trace of movement hidden in the reeds below. There, a shape half shrouded by mist. Two Dinosaurs, their sails glistening in the dim light like dark sails on a flooded plain. The larger, a female, stood guard at the edge of a shallow pool, her head low as she sifted through reeds with her great bill. Beside her, the male lumbered slowly, keeping watch. Between them, three juveniles splashed clumsily through the water, their calls soft and uncertain. The Tarbosaurus crouched, lower eyes narrowing. The young would be easy prey, soft-skinned, untested, but instinct warred with experience. She had hunted these giants before, Their claws could slash through bone, and together they were formidable. She shifted her weight, testing the mud, feeling how it pulled at her legs. The ground was treacherous, too wet for a clean charge, too deep to risk entrapment. One misstep could mean a broken limb, and in this world injury was a slow death sentence. Below the female, Dinosaurus lifted her head. Her nostrils flared. She froze, her body tensing. The male noticed and turned sharply toward the hill, his sail catching the light. For a moment, everything was still predator and prey, locked in an ancient dialogue that needed no words. The Tarbosaurus remained motionless, a statue of intent, while the male took a single step forward, letting out a low, guttural soul sound that vibrated through the damp air. It wasn't aggression, it was warning, a declaration that he had seen her, that he would not run, that this territory was not free for the taking. The Tarbosaurus, assessing the odds, exhaled through her nose in a plume of steam. Her gaze shifted briefly toward the smaller shapes behind the adults, then back again. The pair had positioned themselves well, bodies angled toward her tails, poised like counterweights, claws raised just above the surface. They didn't need to chase her away, they only needed to stand their ground. A gust of wind turned the grass, carrying her scent toward them. The youngest Dinosaurus squealed and pressed closer to the adults. The Tarbosaurus stepped forward, once testing their reaction. The response was immediate. The male lowered his head, arms outstretched, the massive claws glinting. The female positioned herself sideways, forming a barrier between the predator and her young. This was enough. The Tarbosaurus knew the difference between hunger and recklessness. Her belly was not empty. The last hunt had been successful. She studied the family one last time, not with anger, but with something almost like respect. Then, with a slow turn of her massive skull, she began to withdraw. The reeds parted around her as she melted back into the post-storm haze, vanishing between curtains of steam and light. The Dinosaurus pair did not move for several minutes. Their hearts pounded, their muscles taut, eyes fixed on the path where the predator had disappeared. Gradually, as the air cleared and no sound followed, the tension faded. The male rumbled softly, a low reassurance to his young. The female resumed her foraging, her long arms dipping once more into the murky shallows. The juveniles, sensing safety, began to play again, splashing and pecking at drifting leaves. High above, the sky broke open into blue. Sunlight poured across the flooded plain, turning the pools into mirrors. Dragonflies hovered in renewed swarms, their wings catching fragments of gold. The air smelled of wet earth and life restored. From a distance, the Tarbosaurus's silhouette appeared briefly on the horizon, a moving shadow against the sky, pausing once to scan the land before fading into the trees. She would hunt again when the time was right, when the ground was firm, when hunger outweighed caution. For now, she would let the giants keep their peace. In the Nemect, survival was not a story of constant violence, but of choices of when to fight and when to withdraw. The storm had cleansed the land, rebalanced the scales. For predator and prey alike, it was a reminder in a world this vast and volatile strength was not measured only in teeth or claws, but in patience, in timing, in knowing when the river gives and when it takes. The rain's last drop slid from the leaves. Somewhere in the distance, the call of a Saurolophus echoed faintly, a reminder that life continued, unaware of how narrowly death had passed it by. Tarbosaurus, the emperor of River Tim. To meet the gaze of Tarbosaurus was to look into the distilled essence of power. 40 feet of sinew and muscle, 15 feet tall at the head, 5 tons of precision biology designed for dominance. She was the apex of late Cretaceous Asia, a monarch not crowned by ritual, but by necessity. Everything about her was the economy, fewer risks, sharper senses, endless patience. The first impression is always the skull, long, narrow, and lined with serrated teeth that curved backward like scythes. Compared to her North American cousin Tyrannosaurus rex, the Tarbosaurus was built differently, leaner, less brute force, more finesse. The bones of her snout were thinner and more flexible, the jaws capable of subtle movement. Where T-Rex was a sledgehammer, Tarbosaurus was a rapier. She didn't crush skulls, she sliced through flesh and muscle with surgical precision. This difference wasn't accident, it was environment. In the broad, river-fed plains of the Nemegt, prey moved through forests and marshes rather than open plains. The massive herds of Triceratops and Ankylosaurus that shaped T-Rex's evolution in North America did not exist here. Instead, the menu was more varied: hadrosaurs, ornithomimosaurs, small theropods, even fish and carrion. To thrive, Tarbosaurus evolved as a specialist hunter for narrow channels and soft terrain. Her long, low skull let her dart her jaws between trees or strike with accuracy where her heavier cousin would have blundered. Her senses were weapons of their own. Each nostril was a living sensor array capable of detecting the faintest trace of decay or movement. Studies of her inner ear canals reveal remarkable balance and auditory acuity. She could hear the low-frequency calls of hadrosaurs miles away, sense the thud of footsteps through waterlogged soil. Even her eyesight, binocular forward-facing, gave her not only depth perception, but a kind of depth in time, the ability to predict a target's next motion before it happened. Her territory was the rivers, the arteries of the Nemegt Formation. Every living creature needed them, and every current carried scent. Where water pooled into oxbows and the mud thickened with footprints, Tarbosaurus ruled. She was both hunter and scavenger, reading the landscape the way a tracker reads stories in ash. To a scientist today, the Nemegt may look desolate. To Tarbosaurus, it was a tapestry alive with information, every ripple, every rustle a line of code. When hunger pressed, she hunted actively. She could move faster than her bulk suggested, up to 25 kilometers per hour in short bursts, in enough to overtake an injured hadrosaur or isolate a straggler from the herd. Her long tail acted as a counterweight, allowing sudden pivots and balance on uneven ground. Yet she rarely wasted energy. Tarbosaurus did not chase unless she knew she would catch. She waited often for hours, sometimes for days, letting weather and terrain turn in her favor. In the dry season, when rivers shrank to strings of shallow pools, she followed their course, preying on the weak who lingered too long at the water's edge. During floods, when carcasses drifted downstream, she scavenged, tearing through softened hide with jaws that could exert over 6 tons of force. Scavenging wasn't failure, it was strategy. Every ounce of energy conserved was another day survived. The Emperor did not lower herself to desperation. She simply redefined what victory looked like. Scientists have found bite marks on the bones of Saurolophus and Nemegtosaurus that match her dental pattern, narrow V-shaped gouges, deep but clean. Some were fatal, others healed over, suggesting encounters that prey survived long enough to remember. She didn't always need to kill. Sometimes the mere appearance of her shadow was enough to scatter herds and grant her dominion. Her kingdom changed with the seasons. In the monsoon months, she followed the floodwaters north, shadowing migrations of herbivores that sought new feeding grounds. In the droughts, she retreated to the shaded valleys where rivers persisted longest. She was not tied to a single place, but to the movement of life itself. Fossil evidence suggests her kind ranged across what is now Mongolia and northern China, a vast empire connected not by territory, but by rivers, by instinct, by hunger. To imagine her up close is to confront evolution at its most efficient. Her skin was pebbled with scales, the some regions dotted with small sensory pits that might have detected pressure or temperature. Her tongue, muscular and long, flicked the air to sample scent particles. Her arms, famously short but powerfully built, may have anchored her prey during feeding, stabilizing massive struggles with an efficiency modern predators still envy. She was a design honed not for aesthetics but for consequence. And yet despite her power, Tarbosaurus was not immune to the forces that governed all life in the Nemegt. Drought, disease and competition could erode even the mightiest lineage. Juveniles faced mortality rates as steep as any modern predators. Fossilized nests suggest that only a handful of hatchlings reached adulthood, their odds decided by luck and adaptation. Even the Emperor was once vulnerable, a hatchling no longer than a turkey chick trembling in the reeds. When we look at her fossils today, her skull resting open-mouthed in a museum light, we see not just terror but equilibrium. Every predator is also part of a balance. Without her, herbivores would overrun the plains. Without the plains, there would be no rivers to sustain her and deceive her. The Nemegt was not a kingdom of cruelty, it was a circle of necessity held together by invisible contracts. As the sun dips below the cliffs, casting long shadows over the floodplain, we see her silhouette wading into the shallows. Around her, dragonflies rise from the surface like sparks. She lowers her head, drinks, and listens. Somewhere in the distance, a herd of Saurolophus bellows the same deep call that carried through this valley 70 million years ago. Her eyes narrow. Not hunger yet, but awareness. The night will come, and with it new chances. In the empire of rivers, she remains eternal, not as a monster, but as balance incarnate. Night runner, Eoraptor on the margin. Dusk in the Nemegt arrives like a held breath, slow, amber, and heavy with suspense. The heat of day exhales from the ground, and mist begins to crawl from the river's surface, veiling the reeds in silver smoke. The water mirrors the sky's fading fire, a boundary between light and shadow. Along that trembling edge, a shape moves smaller than Tarbosaurus yet, cut from the same ancestral cloth. This is Alioramus, the river's shadow hunter. At barely 20 feet long and weighing less than a ton, Alioramus was a lightweight among tyrannosaurids, half the size, twice the nerve. Its body was built for agility, long legs, slender bones, a skull drawn out like a blade. The result was a predator tuned not for brute dominance, but for finesse. Where Tarbosaurus ruled by strength, Alioramus survived by timing. Its eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, wide forward-facing, built for low illumination. Inside its skull, sensory nerves converged into a structure exquisitely sensitive to movement. Every ripple on the water, every flicker in the grass translated into opportunity. As the larger tyrant slept off the day's heat, Alioramus took to the dusk, slipping through the marshes where small game stirred. Tonight hunger has driven it to the water's edge. The scent of fish lingers in the humid air, the aftertaste of a receding flood. Small creatures gather here to drink before darkness swallows the plain. Frogs, lizards, juvenile dinosaurs. To Alioramus, each is a possibility. It crouches, low nostrils quivering. The light fades fast now and the insect's chorus rises. Every sound becomes sharper, the drip of condensation from leaves, the whisper of wings, the rustle of movement across silt. For most creatures, the coming night means risk. For Alioramus, it is cover. Its skull was narrower than any other tyrannosaurid's, filled with long interlocking teeth that formed a row of serrated daggers. But they were not built to crush bone like Tarbosaurus's monumental jaws. These were tools of precision for gripping, slicing, and releasing, ideal for smaller prey. Some scientists compare it to a modern wolf, a predator not of brute force but of endurance and adaptability. Near the river, a group of small herbivores, Elmosaurus, fleet-footed omnivores with long tails and light builds, approach cautiously to drink. Their heads dart nervously as they test the air. They know danger, but not from where. Alioramus watches from behind a stand of cicads, motionless except for the faint twitch of its tail. It can see their reflections trembling on the water's surface. It calculates the distance, 20 meters. Downwind. Perfect. Then a splash upstream. The Elmosaurus scatter, alarmed by something unseen. The moment passes. The hunter waits, breath steady. To strike too soon is to fail. Patience is the first law of predators. When the group returns, they move closer this time, emboldened by silence, the smallest steps into the shallows. That's the one. Alioramus shifts its weight, pressing into the mud. Muscles coil like springs beneath its skin. A heartbeat. 2. Then the silence breaks. The predator bursts from the reeds in an explosion of motion. Mud sprays, wings of startled insects erupt into the air. The Elmosaurus react instantly, scattering across the bank, claws kicking up spray. Alioramus lunges at the trailing juvenile jaws, snapping shut just behind it. The prey swerves sharply, splashing through knee-deep water. The hunter follows, fast but careful speed tempered by instinct. One wrong step here and the suctioning mud could trap even the nimblest limb. It's a delicate dance on shifting ground. Alioramus zigzags through the shallows, jaws snapping water, flying around its flanks in arcs of silver. Then the juvenile slips a half second of imbalance. The predator lunges again, its long snout slashing through reed's teeth, catching the base of the tail. The victim cries out, thrashing wildly, and that sound echoes across the floodplain. But something in the distance answers, not prey but power. The low rolling bellow of a Tarbosaurus, the river's true monarch, has stirred. Alioramus freezes, still holding the squirming animal. Instinct screams louder than hunger now. The Tarbosaurus's call rolls again closer. A warning from the high ranks of the food chain. For a smaller predator, this is the line between ambition and suicide. In one clean motion, Alioramus releases its catch and backs away, head low, body tensed for retreat. The wounded Elmosaurus stumbles into the reeds and vanishes. The hunter remains silent, motionless, listening. The ground trembles faintly, not from thunder, but from footsteps somewhere beyond the fog. Alioramus turns and slips into the darkness, vanishing, as if the night itself swallowed it whole. Its narrow body glides between the trees, each movement measured, rehearsed. The hunt is lost, but the lesson is old: survival first, hunger later. In the ecosystem of the Nemegd, dominance was never singular. It was layered, negotiated, shifting with every dusk and dawn. Alioramus thrived, not by ruling, but by existing in the margins between the giants in the hours when they slept in the places they ignored, in the half-light where opportunity still flickered. When the first stars rise over the wetland, the world looks calm again. The river gleams like glass reflecting constellations long erased from the human memory. Somewhere in the reeds unseen, Eoraptor drinks from the same water where it failed to kill. Its breath sends ripples outward across the reflection of ancient skies, a reminder that even in the kingdom of Titans there was room for the quiet hunters who mastered the art of patience. The fleet-footed Elmosaurus in peril. The twilight deepens, and with it the stillness that settles before movement. The river glows bronze beneath the fading sun, its surface broken only by drifting petals and the occasional ripple of a fish beneath. Across the water, reeds whisper as the wind moves through them, and a small flock of Elmosaurus emerge from the tree line. They are cautious, graceful, and restless creatures of perpetual motion. Each stands no taller than a human child, but built like an athlete, long legs, slim neck, arms tipped with agile claws. Their tails act as counterweights, balancing each sprint and turn with a mechanical precision. In the dying light, their feathers shimmer faintly with their iridescent hues, bronze rust and shadow blending them perfectly into the reeds. The Elmosaurus were Oviraptorosaurs, cousins to the great predators, yet far lighter, more refined. They combined the intelligence of birds with the wariness of prey. Every movement of their heads, every flicker of their eyes suggested calculation. They lived in small flocks, not just for protection, but for awareness, each individual a pair of eyes contributing to the shared vigilance of the group. Now, as the sky dims to violet, they gather by the shallows to drink. The air hums with tension. They know the water gives life but also risk. Predators favour the same places. Still thirst overrules caution. The first steps forward, neck arched, bill dipping. The rest follow in rhythm, heads bobbing like dancers rehearsed in ancient choreography. Across the river, hidden in the tall grass, Eoraptor watches. Its body is half submerged in shadow, only the faint glint of its eye betraying its presence. The air currents carry the scent of the small dinosaurs directly to its nostrils. It waits silent, motionless. The muscles along its back twitch once, then go still. The Elmosaurus drink in quick intervals, constantly scanning between sips. Their senses are sharp, large optic lobes in the brain grant excellent vision. Their inner ears detect low vibrations through the ground. It's not sight or sound that betrays the hunter this time, but rhythm. A subtle pause in the night chorus, where there should be noise. The flock freezes. A second later, the grass erupts. Eoraptor bursts from its cover mud and reeds flying in all directions. The ground shakes beneath its charge. The Elmosaurus scatter instantly, their bodies moving like flares in the dusk, fast, erratic, unpredictable. The flock doesn't panic blindly, it fragments with purpose. One group darts toward the trees, the other follows the riverbank, creating confusion through motion. Their coordination is instinctual, honed by generations of survival. Eoraptor focuses on the nearest straggler, a juvenile lagging behind. The predator's stride lengthens. Its claws rake through the air, its jaws open with a hiss of breath. The Elmosaurus leaps forward, its toes barely touching the ground. Its bones are hollow, its muscles taut with elastic energy built for sprinting. It accelerates to nearly 40 kilometers per hour, weaving through reeds so tightly that even the Tyrannosaur's precision falters. The chase is a study in contrast raw strength against reflex silence against sound. The Elmosaurus dashes through a grove of cycads, the tips of its feathers brushing the ferns. The Eoraptor follows, crashing through foliage, losing precious seconds with every step. Its momentum is too great, its frame too large for the maze of trunks and roots. Ahead, the flock calls out to one another, short staccato clicks, a primitive language of survival. Each sound relays position and direction, helping them coordinate even in chaos. It's communication without thought, a biological algorithm written into their DNA. In that fleeting moment, they are one organism, many bodies, one will to live. The hunted juvenile veers left, plunging into a patch of shallow water. Splashes erupt a miscalculation. The mud clings to its legs, slowing its pace. The predator seizes the chance. Eoraptor pivots tail, whipping out to balance the turn, and lunges forward with terrifying precision. The air fills with spray and feathers, but just as its jaws snap shut, the Elmosaurus dives beneath a fallen branch. The predator's teeth scrape wood instead of flesh. A hiss, frustration, retreat. Eoraptor halts, chest-heaving eyes darting through the reeds. The small dinosaur reappears on the far side, soaked and trembling but alive. It stumbles toward the flock, which has regrouped at a safe distance. Together they vanish into the undergrowth, their silhouettes dissolving into darkness. The predator stands alone in the quiet aftermath. The river resumes its voice, frogs, croaking insects, buzzing life returning to rhythm. Alioramus lowers its head to drink, tasting the same water that carried its failure. It's not defeat, merely a recalibration. The night is long and the wetlands are full of chances. For creatures like Alioramus, survival is not about dominance, it's about persistence. It knows when to withdraw, when to conserve energy, when to wait. And for the Elmosaurus, every escape sharpens instinct, every close call writes new reflexes into the lineage. Under the glow of the first stars, the reeds sway as if whispering applause for the narrow escape. Predator and prey have rehearsed this scene countless times before, and will again each iteration, ensuring that both endure. The night belongs to the hunters, but not exclusively. In the Nemegut, even the smallest creature that runs fast enough can write its own victory into the mud. Deltas that fed a continent. The Nemeg was not merely a landscape, it was a breathing machine of water and sediment, an ancient rhythm that shaped life across a continent. To understand why so many species flourished here, we must step back and see the pattern from above, not as isolated fossils, but as a living network. Rivers braided and divided across the low plains, splitting into countless smaller branches that glimmered under the sun like strands of quicksilver. This was not one river, but 1,000 conversations between land and water. Each season rewrote the map. During the monsoon, rains from the uplands swelled the main channels until they overflowed their banks, spreading life outward in sheets of silty water. As the floods receded, they left behind ribbons of fertile mud, new ground for ferns, cycads, and the first flowering shrubs. In the dry months, the channel shrank again, revealing oxbows and peat-choked pockets where decay brewed into the dark perfume of rot and renewal. These were the lungs of the Nemegt ecosystem, the breathing spaces between extremes where death and growth were inseparable. Geologists call this kind of system anabranching, a labyrinth of interconnected streams that diverge and reunite, redistributing water and sediment like blood through arteries. Each branch created its own miniature world, some deep and permanent, others temporary, appearing only during flood season. This hydrological mosaic fed an astonishing range of habitats: open floodplains for the herding, Saurolophus marshy shallows for the slow-moving Dinosaurus forest edges for the nimble Elmosaurus, and still stagnant pools where predators like Tarbosaurus waited in ambush. Where the channels split, they often formed crevasse splays, fans of sediment left behind when floodwaters burst through the riverbanks and spread across the plain. These splays became fertile meadows almost overnight. In their soft soil, new plants took root quickly, attracting herds of herbivores that grazed on the tender shoots. The cycle repeated endlessly: flood, fertility, feeding, and decay. Life here didn't just survive the chaos, it depended on it. The wetlands also created a second economy, one of carcasses. Every surge of water brought both birth and death. Floods drowned the unwary, swept the weak downstream, and gathered remains in backwaters where scavengers thrived. Fish, crocodilians, turtles, and dinosaurs all became part of this nutrient circuit. When a hadrosaur herd crossed a rising river, some individuals inevitably succumbed, their bodies trapped in eddies, buried in silt, sealed by time. Those remains became banquets for opportunists and later fossils for us. The same processes that enriched the soil also wrote the history we now uncover. In places where water pooled for months, peat pockets formed dense organic sponges that trapped and preserved plant matter. These peatlands were the quiet heart of the Nemegt, where decay slowed and chemistry took over. Over millennia, they would become the black seams of coal now buried beneath the Gobi's crust, the remnants of forests that grew drowned and grew again. Even today, if you strike the rock right, you can smell the faint, sweet trace of ancient vegetation, the ghost of a rainforest under your feet. Biodiversity flourished because the system never stood still. Each season erased the last and left room for improvisation. The landscape trained its inhabitants to adapt not to a single stable environment, but to change itself. The strong did not conquer, the flexible endured. Predators learned to migrate between channels as prey followed shifting food sources. Herbivores evolved to sense the first stirrings of the flood to find new feeding grounds before drought closed in. Even the plants participated in the rhythm, seeds carried by currents, germinating wherever the river decided to pause. To a modern ecologist, this might resemble the Amazon's Varzea or the Okavango Delta, places where water is both destroyer and giver. But in the Nemegut, the stakes were grander. Each flood reshaped an entire web of life, and in that reshaping lay opportunity. A freshly cut riverbank meant exposed routes for herbivores to dig up stranded fish for Dinosaurus to scoop, and the scent of carrion for Tarbosaurus to follow. The delta was a perpetual feast for those who could read its moods. Fossil evidence confirms this dynamic abundance. Bones of aquatic turtles are found alongside land-dwelling dinosaurs, their shells carried miles from their original habitats. Fish scales appear inside the stomach cavities of terrestrial species. Whole skeletons are found aligned in the same direction, swept together by floodwaters that both killed and entombed them. Each specimen is a postcard from a vanished catastrophe, destruction as preservation. For the animals that called this world home, the rivers were more than water. They were memory markers of migration routes, mating seasons, and survival strategies. To live here was to live with motion, to anticipate the next shift of current, the next rise or retreat. The Nemegt did not reward stillness. It rewarded awareness. At dusk, when the floodplain shimmered beneath 1,000 reflected suns, the air would have been alive with sound insects, birds, the bellows of distant herds, the splash of something large moving unseen. In those moments, the delta was not a wilderness, it was an orchestra. Each current, each breath of wind carried notes of life and decay perfectly intertwined. Today, we see only the bones, but those bones were born of this perpetual rhythm of wars that wandered, drowned, and rebuilt, of floods that both killed and resurrected. The Nemegt's anabranching veins did not just feed the creatures within it, they fed time itself, leaving behind a fossil symphony that continues to play beneath the desert's silence. Bagara Utton, shadow on the family tree. In the fossil record, not every predator roars, some whisper. Some leave only fragments, a jawbone here, a claw there, traces of lives that resist certainty. Bagara Utton. The small hunter is one of those whispers, an enigma trapped in stone, a creature defined as much by mystery as by bone. Discovered in the 90s within the Nemegt Formation, its remains at first seemed unremarkable. A partial skeleton, a few vertebrae, a lower jaw slender enough to fit in 2 hands. Yet hidden in those delicate fragments was a story that still unsettles paleontology. The bones spoke of something fast, light and clever, a carnivore that didn't fit neatly into any known family. It was too gracile for a tyrannosaur, too robust for a true dontid, and too specialized to be easily dismissed. The name Bagratan Ostromi was coined from the Mongolian words meaning small hunter. To the scientists who first studied it, the anatomy hinted at paradox. Its skull was narrow and elongated. The teeth small but sharply curved. The hind limbs were built for speed, their joints flexible and lightly muscled, more the build of a pursuit predator than an ambusher. It was a shadow in motion, a hunter of opportunity amid the floodplains and scrublands of the Nemegt. Picture it moving through the reeds, low, silent, alert. It could not overpower the giant herbivores or challenge Tarbosaurus for dominance, but it didn't need to. Nature often saves her greatest elegance for the smaller players. Bagratan thrived in the margins, scavenging, stalking juveniles, or seizing prey that others overlooked. It filled the gaps between titans, reminding us that ecosystems are built as much from nimbleness as from might. For years that was the story until new eyes began to question it. In 2024, a group of paleontologists re-examined the Bagara Utton fossils using micro-CT scans and histological thin sections. The results complicated everything. They found that several bones long thought to belong to one animal might in fact represent a mosaic of individuals, a Frankenstein composite assembled by the slow chaos of fossilization. Some elements, such as the skull and pelvis, bore traits of juvenile tyrannosaurids. Others looked like those of smaller, more primitive theropods. This revelation raised a new question. Was Bagara Utton an ever a distinct species at all? Or was it a misinterpreted juvenile of a much larger predator? Perhaps a young Tarbosaurus or even an adolescent Eoraptor. The debate remains unresolved, and in that uncertainty lies its fascination. Science, after all, is not the pursuit of answers, but the refinement of better questions. Every fossil is both evidence and illusion, shaped by the biases of time erosion and human interpretation. The Nemegt sediments are treacherous storytellers, bloods mixed skeletons, scavengers scattered bones, and minerals fused fragments from different creatures into single tombs. What looks like unity might be coincidence. What we call a species may be a ghost stitched together by geology. Yet even if Bagratan is not truly its own lineage, it has earned its place in history. It reminds us of the humility required in paleontology, that certainty is rare, and that every discovery carries the echo of doubt. To study it is to engage in detective work across 70 million years of distance. Each hypothesis must sift through the same evidence. Was this creature an evolutionary experiment that failed? A misidentified youth of a tyrant king, or something entirely new, a transitional form that blurred the lines between families? When scientists hold the fragile jawbone under laboratory light, they notice something intimate. The fine ridges where muscle once attached, the wear on the teeth from flesh or bone, the porous texture of bone still half grown. These details, microscopic yet vivid, breathe life into the question. If Bagratan was indeed young when it died, its story may be less about identity and more about growth, how predators evolve through stages, each phase an adaptation in miniature. In the field beneath the desert's silence, the site of its discovery still bears faint impressions of that uncertainty. The surrounding rocks contain traces of multiple species, as if the Nemegt itself refused to separate them. The Gobi's wind, endless and impartial, smooths the cliffs where the bones were once hidden, blurring lines as nature always does. Whether Bagratan was a true small hunter, or merely a fleeting stage in the life of something greater, it remains a symbol of how little we truly know and how much we still want to. In that sense, its name is fitting. It hunted not only across the floodplains of prehistory, but through the imagination of those who study it, a shadow darting between definitions. Perhaps that's the most honest legacy of all, a fossil that refuses to settle into a label that keeps the conversation alive. Every generation of scientists rediscovers Bagratan anew, each seeing something different in its slender bones. To some, it's a footnote in the saga of tyrants. To others, it's the missing page in a family tree still being drawn. And somewhere in the layers of red stone, the truth still waits, not erased, only delayed like a message sealed in sediment, waiting for the next curious mind to open it. The claws that gardened the forest, the Herrerasaurus. If the Nemegt had its monsters, it also had its miracles, creatures so strange that they defied every category. And none was stranger or more hauntingly beautiful than Herrerasaurus, the giant that looked like it had been designed by imagination itself. To stand before one would have been like watching evolution dream in public. 33 feet from snout to tail, 5 tons of feathered muscle balanced on 2 tree trunk legs and arms, longer than a man is tall, each ending in curved claws, nearly a meter long. They were scythes of bone and keratin curved like crescents of the moon. When the first fossils were found in the 1940s, scientists assumed they belonged to a carnivore, perhaps a raptor of immense proportions, a reaper among predators. But decades later, when more complete skeletons emerged, the truth proved far more extraordinary. The Herrerasaurus was no killer. It was an herbivore, a leaf-eater descended from one of the most infamous bloodlines on Earth. The theropods, the same family that gave rise to Velociraptor Tarbosaurus and even the first birds. The Reaper's claws, it turned out, were not for tearing flesh, but for tending the forest. Imagine the riverside thickets of the Nemegt dense with cycadees, palms and ferns. The morning mist clings to every surface as this giant moves slowly through the green, its long arms sweeping aside branches, its hooked claws curling around fronds, pulling leaves toward its narrow beaked mouth. Each movement is deliberate, almost gentle. In a world of thunder and speed, the Herrerasaurus was an island of patience. Its broad torso and potbelly housed a vast fermentation chamber, a living cauldron where tough plant matter broke down into energy. Its teeth were small and leaf-shaped, arranged for slicing, not grinding. Combined with its long neck, it could browse from ground to canopy without moving more than a few steps. The claws, though terrifying to behold, were perfectly adapted for pulling vegetation, closer gardener's tools, not a butcher's. But make no mistake, they could defend as well as gather. One well-timed swipe from those limbs could slash a predator open from throat to thigh. Fossil reconstructions suggest a range of motion that would have allowed wide-arcing strikes, too slow for duels with Tarbosaurus perhaps, but lethal in close quarters. It's possible that even the great tyrant thought twice before attacking one of these lumbering giants. From an evolutionary view, the Herrerasaurus represents one of nature's boldest experiments, the reversal of the predatory script. Somewhere deep in its ancestry, a small sharp-toothed carnivore began eating plants, perhaps supplementing its diet with seeds and fruit during lean seasons. Over millions of years, its descendants became slower, heavier, and more peaceful, trading speed for stability, talons for reach, and a killer's frame for a farmer's patience. Evolution, it seems, does not honor loyalty to any role. It honors survival. Its feathers downy on the body, filamentous along the arms, may have served for insulation or display. In the filtered light of the Cretaceous forest, the creature might have looked almost mythical, dark plumage streaked with lighter patterns, perhaps shimmering with iridescence as it moved between shadow and sun. Males may have used their massive arms and sail-like feathers in mating displays, spreading them like banners, waving them in slow hypnotic arcs. For the first time in the dinosaur age, beauty itself might have become a tool of survival. The forest thrived on their presence. As Herrerasaurus browsed, it opened paths for smaller animals to spread seeds through its droppings and prune trees before they could dominate the floodplain. In this sense, it was not just a consumer of vegetation, it was an architect of the ecosystem. His appetite shaped the growth of forests that in turn fed countless other species. Every swipe of its claw, every slow turn of its head was an act of ecological engineering, and yet there is something ghostly about its form. To modern eyes, it seems to belong to another mythology, entirely part sloth, part bird, part dragon. But its reality is stranger than any myth, a creature born from the bones of predators that used the very machinery of killing to sustain life. Where evolution had once honed blades for slaughter, it now turned them into pruning shears for peace. Fossils of Herrerasaurus are rare, but when paleontologists uncover a single claw, the impact is almost spiritual. The curves of bone are elegant and deliberate, each ridge a testament to purpose. Held in human hands, it dwarfs its finder, a reminder of scale, of humility, of how small we are next to time's imagination. Picture it one last time standing beneath the trees. The wind shifts and the feathers along its arms stir. It raises its claws slowly, reaching toward a branch heavy with leaves. The forest hushes as the giant feeds a movement as old as sunlight and as quiet as evolution itself. In that stillness, you can almost sense the continuity between all things predator, herbivore, and everything that came after. For when the last Herrerasaurus fell, its lineage did not end. Its story continued, reshaped into the wings of birds that still garden our skies today. When the rivers withdraw. There came a time each year when the Nemegit's heartbeat slowed. The rains retreated toward the mountains, and the sky hardened into glass. What had been a living mosaic of rivers and green corridors began to contract a slow, shimmering collapse of abundance. The floodplains cracked open, the delta channels shrank to silver scars, and the air thickened with the smell of dust and thirst. The dry season had arrived. Across the plain, life reorganized itself with the rare precision of an old ritual. Herds that once grazed freely along the riverbanks now clustered around the last surviving pools. Saurolophus herds moved in long wavering lines across the horizon, their calls softer, their pace slower. Insects vanished, the air stilled. Even the colour of the land seemed to fade greens, giving way to grey and ochre, like an ancient painting rubbed almost blank. Shrubs with waxy leaves clung to life where the soil still held moisture. Thorned bushes spread across the dry flats, replacing ferns and soft grasses. The once thriving forests retreated into the hollows of riverbeds, their shadows shrinking by the day. Every breath of wind carried grit. Every step raised ghosts of dust that drifted like smoke. Predators felt the change first. The smaller hunters, Eoraptor bagaraatan, became desperate, prowling the edges of the shrinking pools where prey still came to drink. The great Tarbosaurus grew leaner, travelling farther each night in search of movement. The giants of the floodplain, Dinosaurs, Herrerasaurus, Nemegitosaurus, followed the receding water, their footprints tracing slow, solemn migrations toward survival. Here the land itself became the test. The pools that remained turned to siege grounds, sanctuaries that could turn to traps within moments. Around them gathered herbivores in uneasy truces, hadrosaurs, ankylosaurs, and smaller ornithomimosaurs, each wary of the others, yet united by need. The air hung heavy with the sound of the tension of thirst, a balance so fragile that even the flutter of a pterosaur's wings could shatter it. At dusk, the predators approached. The Tarbosaurus pair from earlier in the season circled a pool near the base of a dying grove. Their movements were slower now, but their eyes burned with relentless calculation. They had learned patience from the rivers, how to wait for the inevitable moment when weakness broke through order. Each night they lingered closer, testing the herd's resolve. By day, the herbivores endured the heat in silence. Their hides were cracked with dried mud, their ribs rose like ridges beneath skin. When they moved, the ground echoed faintly hollow and hot. Even the smallest creatures, frogs, lizards, and alien mammals, adapted through cunning rather than strength. They tunneled beneath the surface or hid beneath fallen branches, emerging only when the sun dipped below the cliffs. This was the season of attrition, when the strong survived not through power, but through restraint. The creatures of the Nemeged had evolved to live within cycles, not against them. The rivers would always return, but until then the land demanded endurance. From a distance the landscape appeared lifeless, but look closer and it pulsed with quiet struggle. A Dinosaurus waded through a channel reduced to puddles, scooping what little aquatic plants remained. Its sail caught the heat, perhaps dissipating the excess that would have killed a lesser animal. A Tarkia, armoured and steady, trudged toward the same pool, its bony tail dragging a furrow in the dust. Its tongue flicked across dry lips, seeking moisture in the air. Every movement carried cost, every decision calculation. The ecosystem was reorganizing itself in real time, predator and prey forced into proximity, scavengers thriving on collapse. Carcasses near the waterholes became hubs of new activity. Turtles gnawed at bones, fish scavenged the soft flesh that remained, and pterosaurs descended to feed their wings, sending ripples across the dying water. At night, the temperature plunged. The heat that had blistered the plains during the day dissipated into a brittle cold that froze the top layer of mud. Steam rose from the backs of sleeping dinosaurs, coiling into the starlit air. The cries of nocturnal hunters, Adasaurus and smaller dromaeosaurs, cut through the silence like distant alarms. For them, this season was a feast. Weakness had a scent, and the dry season carried it on every gust of wind. Even the sky seemed to change character. Without the haze of humidity, it grew sharp and infinite, filled with stars so clear they could have been carved into the dark. Beneath that cosmic ceiling, life persisted in miniature insects clinging to dew mammals nursing in burrows' eggs, cooling beneath layers of dust. The droughts were not disasters in the Nemeged, they were editors shaping the story of survival. When the water withdrew, it stripped away abundance and forced clarity. Only those species that could endure both flood and famine would persist. In that crucible, intelligence sharpened instincts, refined, and evolution took its quiet notes. By the end of the dry season, the first signs of renewal began to appear, clouds gathering faintly on the western horizon, a distant rumble that stirred memories in every living thing. Herds lifted their heads, predators turned toward the wind. The river would soon return, rewriting the land again. For now, though, the Nemeged slept beneath dust, its rivers reduced to threads, its life condensed into pockets of defiance. Yet even in its harshest hour, the desert did not die. It waited. Beneath the cracked clay, seeds were still alive. Beneath the still mud, fish buried themselves in damp chambers, waiting for the flood to set them free. The silence of drought was not death, it was the long inhale before the rain. Tarkia, the fortress with a brain. When the world turned cruel and the rivers withdrew, few creatures embodied endurance like Tarkia, the clever one. To the untrained eye, it might have looked like a moving boulder, with legs low to the ground, broad as a wagon, every inch of its body plated in armor. But beneath that shell was an intelligence born from necessity, not the cunning of a hunter, but the quiet strategy of a survivor. Tarkia was an ankylosaurid, one of the last and most formidable of its kind. At nearly 25 feet long and weighing close to 5 tons, it was a fortress that walked. Its back was a mosaic of interlocking osteoderms, bony tiles fused beneath the skin, wedged with spikes that caught the light like dull bronze. Down its flanks, smaller plates overlapped like dragon scales, while at the end of its tail hung its signature weapon, a massive knotted club of bone dense enough to shatter the femur of any predator foolish enough to come too close. And yet Tarkia's genius lay not in brute defense but in adaptation. Fossil evidence reveals that its brain case was proportionally larger than that of many other ankylosaurs, an anomaly that earned it its name, which means brainy one. This expanded cranial space suggests heightened sensory processing, sharper smell, better balance, perhaps even improved spatial awareness. In the brutal chessboard of the Nemeged, such awareness was life itself. When the drought came, Tarkia's survival hinged on calculation. It needed to manage heat hydration and exposure with the precision of a tactician. Its heavy armor, though defensive, trapped warmth. Overheating was as dangerous as predators. To cope, it traveled mostly at dawn and dusk, resting under sparse shrubs during the searing hours of midday. Its nostrils, lined with complex passages, acted as natural air conditioners, cooling each breath before it reached its lungs. In the shimmer of the dry plains, it looked like a relic of an earlier, wetter world, carrying its own shade across the dust. But water was the true battlefield. As the rivers dwindled, every living creature converged on the last remaining pools, places where survival demanded strategy. Tarkia did not rely on sight alone to find them. Some paleontologists speculate that it may have followed the movements of pterosaurs, whose flight patterns often traced the invisible veins of water across the plain. When flocks of the great Ashdarchids circled and glided low over a particular valley, Tarkia would begin its slow, deliberate march in that direction, a reptilian pilgrim guided by the sky. Reaching the pools was only half the struggle. The true danger waited their predators concealed among the reeds, or the threat of collapsing mud that could trap a creature too heavy to escape. Here the ankylosaur's keen sense of smell came into play. It tested the air before approaching reading scent, like scripture, the iron tang of blood, the musk of Tarbosaurus, the stale odour of decay. If danger lingered, Tarkia waited until dusk when heat faded, and shadows lengthened using darkness as its second layer of armour. When it did approach the water, every motion was deliberate. It lowered its head armour, plates glinting, and drank with slow gulps, eyes scanning constantly. Nearby herbivores often clustered around it, finding courage in the presence of the walking fortress. Even Tarbosaurus, the undisputed emperor of the Nemegt, knew caution when facing one of these living tanks. Fossilized tail clubs show stress fractures, evidence that they were used not just as displays but in real combat. One swing of that massive weapon could break a leg or crush a skull. For a predator weighing 5 tons, that was deterrent enough. The mechanics of that tail were a masterpiece of evolution. Vertebrae near the club were fused into a rigid handle, while tendons along the spine acted as a spring. When Tarkia swung, the energy travelled like a whip crack, concentrating force at the tip. Simulations suggest a strike could deliver impacts exceeding 4,000 newtons, enough to rupture bone. Yet the weapon was not just offensive, it was communicative. In groups, ankylosaurs may have used tail gestures or strikes against the ground as signals, warnings, displays, even a way to assert hierarchy without violence. In its quiet way, Tarkia ruled the drought. While others fled or fought, it endured. Its diet of low shrubs and dry vegetation made it less dependent on the lush floodplains that vanished each year. By storing water in its tissues and minimizing movement, it could outlast weeks of scarcity. Its physiology was patience made flesh. As night fell, the temperature plummeted. Steam rose from the cracked mud where the last puddles clung to life. Tarkia moved slowly beneath a field of cold stars, every step measured tail sweeping dust behind it, like a silent metronome. The air smelled faintly of rain, distant yet approaching. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the cycle was beginning again. The ankylosaur paused, lifting its head toward the faint glimmer of lightning in the far sky. For millions of years, creatures like this had endured through rhythm, not the rhythm of predation or flight, but the deeper rhythm of the earth itself. Flood and drought, birth and decay, silence and renewal. Tarkia was more than armor. It was memory, a living archive of adaptation. Beneath its shell lay the mind of a survivor tuned not for conquest, but for endurance. The clever one indeed, the last sentinel of a world that tested every living thing and found only those who could wait. Predator of the hour, Adasaurus. The moon rises pale and sharp over the Nemegt basin, washing the landscape in silver and shadow. The heat of the day has bled away, leaving behind a brittle stillness, broken only by the rustle of dry leaves and the distant croak of frogs hidden among the reeds. This is when the great hunters sleep, but for one smaller predator, the night is an invitation. Adasaurus mongoliensis, the phantom of the dark. Barely 2 meters long and light enough to run over soft mud without sinking, Adasaurus was a paradox among killers. It belonged to the dromaeosaurs, the same lineage that gave rise to the legendary Velociraptor, yet it carried an unexpected revision in its anatomy. Where its cousins wielded a long razor-sharp sickle claw on each foot, a weapon honed for slicing through tendon and flesh, Adasaurus's own claw was shorter, blunter, thicker. It was not built to slash, it was built to grip. This small difference changed everything. Instead of pouncing with a flurry of kicks, Adasaurus hunted by anchoring its prey, using the claw like a grappling hook while its jaws did the killing. The skull, compact and reinforced, bore the marks of a powerful bite, a weapon more in line with crushing than tearing. Its neck muscles were dense, coiled like rope, allowing it to deliver quick, fatal clamps to the throats of small herbivores. Evolution had taken the blueprint of a raptor and rewritten it for precision and control, and now beneath the star-strewn sky the predator moves. Its feathers ripple in the faint breeze, mottled for camouflage patches of brown and ash-grey that melt into the background of moonlit scrub. It keeps low to the ground, tail held stiff for balance, every step rehearsed. The world around it is a tapestry of sensory cues, the musk of soil, the rustle of wings, the pulse of something alive. Ahead in the low brush, a small group of Homlocephalum. Flat-headed herbivores no taller than a man's waist graze under the dim light. Their squat bodies move in rhythm, their heads occasionally bumping softly against one another in social display. Their hearing is poor, but their eyes catch motion with uncanny speed. For Adasaurus, this is the challenge: get close enough to strike before they detect the shimmer of the movement. It crouches heart steady. The wind shifts in its favour, carrying scent away from the prey. A cricket's chirp masks the faint crunch of its footfall. It advances 1 metre, then another. The Homolocephale nearest the edge pauses, nostrils flaring. A moment's hesitation, then it returns to feeding. The hunter inches closer, 20 feet, 15. Then the mistake: a pebble shifts under Adasaurus's toe. The sound is microscopic, but in the silence it becomes thunder. Heads snap upward. The flock freezes, eyes glinting white in the dark. The first to move is not the predator, but the prey. The Homolocephale springs sideways in practiced coordination, their limbs a blur, scattering into the undergrowth like startled birds. But Adasaurus has already launched. It moves with terrifying speed, not the lunging chaos of a larger beast, but something surgical. It strikes low, aiming not for the body, but for the leg. The blunt claw hook snags, drags. A young Homolocephale loses footing and falls rolling through the dust. The predator's jaws clamp down an instant later, locking onto the back of the neck. The struggle is short, brutal, and quiet. As the remaining herbivores vanish into the dark, Adasaurus holds fast, adjusting its grip until the movement beneath its teeth ceases. Then it lifts its head, eyes reflecting moonlight, breath misting in the cool air. The night silence returns. It feeds carefully, tearing through muscle but leaving the tougher hide for scavengers. Each bite is deliberate, each swallow small efficiency over indulgence. It will not linger long. Every predator knows that feeding makes one vulnerable. And in the Nemegit, the sound of tearing flesh is a beacon. From somewhere across the plain, a deeper sound replies, a low, rolling growl that belongs to no small hunter. The Tarbosaurus is awake. Adasaurus stiffens. Its feathers flatten. For a heartbeat, it stands motionless, head tilted toward the wind. Then, without ceremony, it abandons the kill and slips away, disappearing into the reeds. Its meal is unfinished, but survival always outweighs greed. To modern scientists, Adasaurus represents an evolutionary whisper, a glimpse into the shifting strategies of the raptor lineage. Its blunt claw and powerful bite suggest that dromaeosaurs were not locked into a single design, but experimenting with new methods of predation. Each adaptation was a compromise, a conversation between speed, precision, and intelligence. Some species became sprinters, others ambushers. Adasaurus chose balance, a master of short bursts and surgical strikes. The Nemegt rewarded that subtlety. In an ecosystem where giants dominated the day, Adasaurus claimed the hours between dusk and moonrise shadow and silence. It was a creature of intervals, thriving in the margins left by others. As dawn approaches, the eastern horizon pales from black to grey. The small predator has already retreated to the safety of the thicket's belly, half full, senses alert. It will rest through the heat, hidden from eyes too large and too slow to notice its passage. The night belongs to the patient, and the Nemegt's smallest tyrants have long learned the quietest hunters leave the fewest bones. Even-headed defenders. Homolocephale, in the shadow of giants, sometimes survival belongs not to the strongest but to the smallest, to those who move unseen, react first and trust the crowd more than their claws. Among the many unsung residents of the Nemeg Basin, few illustrate this truth better than Homolocephale, the even-headed dinosaur. Barely 10 feet from nose to tail and no taller than a human child, Homolocephale was the quiet pulse of the late Cretaceous plains, swift, social, and superbly tuned to danger. While predators like Tarbosaurus and Adasaurus ruled through dominance, Homolocephale thrived through awareness. Its body was built for motion, long hind limbs for sprinting light bones that kept it nimble, and a low forward-leaning stance that allowed it to dart through dense underbrush like a startled bird. But what truly set it apart was its skull, flat-topped, thick-boned, and unlike the domed heads of its Pachycephalosaur cousins. To early paleontologists, this strange-level crown was a puzzle. Why abandon the dramatic helmets seen in other members of its family? The answer may lie in its behaviour. The skull of Homolocephale was reinforced by dense bone and surrounded by strong neck muscles, forming a natural shock absorber. Some scientists believe these animals engaged in headbutting rituals not as acts of violence, but as communication, a physical language of dominance, warning, or affection. Within their small herds, males might have tapped or pressed heads in brief contests, establishing hierarchy without bloodshed. In other moments, they may have used the same behaviour to reaffirm bonds, to synchronize movements before migration, or even to comfort their young. To watch them in life would have been to witness coordination bordering on choreography. Herds moved like single organisms, each member alert to the signals of its neighbours. When one froze, all froze. When one turned, the rest pivoted in near unison, tails slicing the air in rhythm. Their eyesight was exceptional, their hearing acute. A shift in the wind, a ripple of grass, and the entire group could vanish into cover before a predator ever knew they were there, and predators came often. On this night, a small herd gathers at the fringe of a dying forest. The ground is cracked, the air still heavy from a long dry season. They feed cautiously, nibbling at the sparse shoots that sprout in the sand between rocks. Nearby, something moves, silent, deliberate. Hadrosaurus the night runner prowls once more. Its feathers catch the moonlight in fleeting flashes. The smallest Homolocephale, a juvenile, raises its head. Its nostrils flare. For a moment, everything stills, even the wind. Then from deep in the herd, a single thud echoes, skull meeting skull in a sharp, deliberate knock. It's not aggression, it's alarm. The sound travels through the group faster than a shout. Instinct takes over. The herd scatters, exploding into motion. Their limbs blur as they sprint toward the scrub, weaving between roots and stones with astonishing agility. Hadrosaurus lunges from the shadows, claws, flashing teeth, snapping through air a heartbeat too late. Dust rises, footprints vanish, and the night closes again. The predator halts, chest heaving, eyes scanning the dark. The prey has escaped, but not through luck, through design. Homolocephale's strength was never its size or its skull. It was its ability to move as one, to anticipate before reacting. In ecosystems ruled by power, this was a different kind of intelligence, communal, almost tactical. For paleontologists, the fossils of Homolocephale tell a subtler story of survival. Their bones are often found in clusters, suggesting strong social ties, perhaps even family units. Unlike solitary hunters, these small herbivores depended on connection as their greatest defense. Their anatomy reinforces the idea: large eye sockets for wide vision, a long tail for stability during rapid turns, and a light but sturdy frame built for acceleration. There is an elegance in such simplicity. Homolocephale needed no armor, like Tarchaea, no claws like Herrerasaurus, no teeth like Tarbosaurus. It needed only timing. Being small meant eating less, traveling farther, and slipping through danger that crushed larger beasts beneath it. The flat head that once seemed a mystery may have been evolution's nod toward adaptability, a refined design for both awareness and interaction. As dawn approaches, the herd reappears along the riverbank. Mist rises from the water, wrapping them in silver light. They drink in silence, ears flicking at the slightest sound. The young press against the adults, safe once more. From afar, they might appear insignificant, mere background to the colossal dramas of their age. But they were the heartbeat that kept the Nemeg alive, prey that outwitted predators, small creatures that forced evolution to innovate. They remind us that survival is not only about might, but about cooperation and speed, that sometimes the wisest course in a world of giants is simply to run together. In a landscape sculpted by thunder, the even-headed defenders left behind no teeth of terror, no armor of legend, only footprints that tell of unity, of vigilance, and of the quiet brilliance of being small. Lords of the air, Azhdarchids on foot. Dawn breaks over the Nemegt basin, thin and gold spreading, like firelight over the horizon. The air is still heavy with the smell of last night's storm-wet clay, crushed ferns, the faint sweetness of decay. The camera drifts low across the floodplain, following a trail of enormous footprints pressed into soft mud. They lead not to a living creature, but to the end of one, the colossal carcass of a fallen Nemegtosaurus, its long neck, twisted ribs jutting through torn flesh like splintered timbers after a shipwreck. Around the body move shadows, tall, deliberate, patient. At first they seem like cranes, immense silhouettes against the morning haze. Then as the light strengthens, their true scale emerges. These are Azhdarchid pterosaurs, rulers of the Cretaceous sky, and they have come down to the earth to feed. Each one stands as tall as a giraffe, its wings neatly folded along its sides, its neck a living lance stretching 6 meters into the air. Their beaks are long and toothless, honed into points capable of piercing flesh or plucking small prey whole. Though built for flight on land, they walk with eerie confidence, not the awkward shuffling of seabirds, but the smooth stalking gait of four-legged hunters. For decades, scientists imagined pterosaurs as clumsy ground-dwellers, creatures that only truly lived in the air. But Azhdarchids broke that rule. Fossil trackways reveal they were just as adept on land as in flight, moving with the grace of herons or storks. Their narrow feet left precise, evenly spaced prints, evidence of calculated steps, not random wandering. These were not creatures of chaos, they were strategists. Now under the warming sun, a small group of them works the carcass. One probes deep into the open ribcage, its beak slick with fluid. Another stands watch, eyes scanning for movement. The third strides in circles, neck craning, testing the air. There is a method in their feeding, a choreography born from evolution's long rehearsal. They do not tear recklessly. They select extract and consume balancing grace with brutality. It's easy to think of them as scavengers, but that word does them injustice. They occupied the scavenger-predator continuum, opportunists that could hunt when needed and feast when fortune favoured them. When alive, these giants stalked smaller dinosaurs and mammals, striking with lightning speed, impaling their prey with the precision of spears. When death came to the giants of the plains, they became undertakers, cleaning the land with patience. The morning hum deepens. Insects gather over the carcass. Small lizards dart in to steal scraps. The Azydarchids tolerate them for now. Their long heads rise and fall, rhythmically framed against the glare. The sound of their movement is strange. The click of claws on bone, the soft hiss of air through beaks, the whisper of folded wings brushing each other. Then a new sound intrudes. A tremor. Another. The ground begins to quiver beneath the carcass. Dust falls from the ribs like powder. One Azydarchid straightens its neck, stiffening. The others freeze wings half extended. Across the flat, through the haze of heat and morning light, two massive figures emerge. Dark, deliberate and dreadful. Tarbosaurus. Their steps are slow but absolute, the rhythm of inevitability. The first lowers its head to the wind and inhales. The second flares its nostrils and lets out a low, resonant growl that rolls across the plain. It is not a challenge, it is a declaration. The Azydarchids react instantly. Their wings unfurl like sails catching wind, enormous membranes stretching 15 meters tip to tip. Sunlight flashes through them, revealing a tracery of veins and muscle, the living architecture of flight. They do not panic, but they know their place in this hierarchy. With a thunder of air, the first takes off. It launches on all fours, vaulting with its forelimbs before catching the morning thermals. The second follows a leap that sends dust swirling like smoke. Their calls, deep barking croaks, echo as they rise, circling once, twice, before vanishing into the light. The Tarbosaurus pair arrives at the carcass moments later. Their eyes glint amber in the sun. They do not roar or rush. There is no need. They move with the confidence of creatures who have never known competition. The first lowers its head and bites down muscle and bone, yielding under a force measured in tons. The second waits briefly, then joins, tearing a strip of flesh free with a sound like fabric ripping. What the Azydarchids began, the tyrants finish. From above, one pterosaur circles, still watching the scene unfold, a dark cross against the sky. Its kind have ruled the air for nearly 150 million years, outlasting nearly every lineage of predator below. It will wait for the giants to feed, then return to pick the bones clean. That is the rhythm of the world dominance, traded moment to moment, species to species. Down below, the Tarbosaurus lift their heads, blood glistening on their jaws. Around them, the plains are silent except for the slow, rhythmic tearing of flesh. Yet even here there is balance. When these kings finish their meal, their leftovers will nourish others' smaller scavengers, insects, and eventually the soil itself. Life in the Namek was not chaos. It was economy. Even death was currency. As the camera pans outward, the entire scene shrinks into perspective, the twin predators beside the fading carcass, the circling shadow above, and the sun climbing through a sky that has seen all of it before. For every giant that falls, another rises. For every dominion, another dawn. And high above the steaming plain, the lords of the air ride the morning wind, once more vanishing into brilliance, witnesses to a world where every life ends the same way it begins, feeding another. The great passage Nemegtosaurus heard. The plain lies hushed beneath the heat of late morning. The storm has passed, the carcass lies still, and the Tarbosaurus pair feed in slow, deliberate rhythm, tearing, swallowing, resting. Around them, the air trembles with the murmur of insects, the soft flapping of vulturing pterosaurs high above. For now, the hierarchy of life is settled. But beyond the feeding ground, a deeper vibration begins to roll through the dust. It starts as a faint pulse, the rhythmic percussion of footsteps measured and distant. Then the earth itself begins to hum. Over the horizon, the Nemegtosaurus herd appears like a procession of moving hills, each creature vast enough to dwarf the trees that survived the drought. They travel in a loose column, 30 tons of bone and breath per individual neck, swaying like ship masts above a sea of shimmering heat. Their long tails rise and fall in hypnotic rhythm, a living metronome marking the tempo of prehistory. Dust clings to their hides, forming pale veils that turn them into phantoms moving across the Each step is a negotiation not just with the terrain but with the world itself. These sauropods follow ancestral corridors laid down by memory, older than species routes shaped by the pulse of the rivers and the whisper of instinct. They migrate between feeding grounds as the seasons turn, guided by scent, by the faint shimmer of moisture in the distance, and perhaps by the infrasonic calls that resonate through their chests and across the plains. To smaller creatures, these sounds are inaudible. To one another, they are the voice of direction, of unity, a song as old as the continent itself. Ahead, the smell of the carcass drifts toward them. The matriarch halts, lifting her head 30 feet into the air, nostrils wide. The scent of blood means risk, but also information. Predators are near. Her small eyes scan the plain until she sees them. The two Tarbosaurus flanks, streaked with red, standing guard over the fallen sauropod's remains. A moment of stillness passes between species that understand each other perfectly. The tyrants, heavy with meat, lift their heads but do not advance. Their bellies are full, their hierarchy secure. Hunger is the engine of violence, and today it is silent. The Nemegtosaurus herd adjusts course slightly, a slow, deliberate veer that carries them downwind of the kill. No panic, no stampede, only careful calculation. The calves press closer to the adults, sheltered beneath the forest of legs. The matriarch gives a low, resonant call, not a warning, but a reminder. Keep moving, keep distance, stay calm. The Tarbosaurus watch them pass. One lowers its head again, uninterested. The other turns tail, swaying lazily. They are not enemies today, only participants in the same vast pragmatic economy of survival. Even apex predators understand conservation. A chase now would waste energy for little gain. The full belly breeds patience. Patience ensures dominance. The herd continues. Each step sends tremors through the ground, ripples that pass beneath the carcass, through the soil and out into the wide basin. Ajdarchids wheel overhead, following the current of motion like vultures, tracking inevitability. The Nemegtosaurus move on toward the fading green of a distant valley, perhaps the last refuge where the rivers still hold water. To walk among them would be to feel the scale of life itself. Beneath their long shadows, smaller creatures scatter. Flocks of Homalocephalae dart between their feet. Lizards dive into cracks. A lone Tarkia stops mid-stride, waiting for the tremors to pass. Every life adjusts to their presence. They are the continent's moving geography, reshaping paths and destinies by their very passage. Their skin is mottled and scarred with the record of years written in colour and texture. Some carry deep gouges from past attacks, long healed but never forgotten. Others bear parasitic marks, evidence of ancient symbiosis. On their backs, insects ride the dust storms of their movement, feeding on the salt of sweat that glistens under the sun. At the centre of the column, the youngest walk under watchful eyes. Their small size invites peril, but not today. The predators sated grant them passage. The balance holds. Across the plain, this tableau unfolds with the grace of unspoken law, no sound but the whisper of tails and the thunder of slow feet. The camera rises, showing the scale of it. The Tarbosaurus pair now distant their meal, half buried in shadow, while the herd stretches onward for nearly a mile, vanishing into heat and light. From above, they resemble the flow of a river, one that moves not with water, but with life itself. This too was the rhythm of the Nemegd feast and migration, death, an endurance, predator and prey, bound in a cycle older than language. Violence was not constant but conditional. What appeared as mercy was simply the mathematics of survival. By afternoon, the herd reaches higher ground. The wind shifts, carrying away the scent of blood and with it the memory of risk. The matriarch pauses, turns her head once toward the fading plains and then presses forward. Behind her, the last of the herd passes footprints deep as basins, impressions that will outlast their bones. In a few million years, the rivers will carve through these same layers, unearthing those prints for someone else to find, to study, to marvel at. But for now, they are only signs of persistence of beings who understood that the greatest wisdom in a dangerous world is not to conquer, but to move on. Threads in the mud. How fossils form here. Every bone tells a story, but before it can speak, it must be buried. In the Nemegd, death was only the beginning of preservation. This landscape alive with rivers, floods and droughts was not just a stage for prehistory, it was also a machine for memory recording lives grain by grain. To understand the Nemegt Formation is to learn how Earth itself kept its diary. The same rivers that nourished herds and sculpted forests also became editors of history, deciding which lives would be remembered. The process was slow, invisible, relentless, the art of taphonomy, the study of how death becomes discovery. Imagine a sauropod falling near the water's edge. The herd moves on, leaving the body behind. At first, scavengers arrive, small theropods stripping muscle, ajdarchids probing the ribs. Then the insects come, the fish, the decay. For a few days it's a banquet. After a few weeks, just a skeleton bleached beneath the sun. But then, a flood arrives. The river overflows its banks, churning mud and sand into a rushing current. Within hours, the carcass is half buried, sealed in a mix of silt clay and plant matter. The flood recedes, the sun returns, and time begins its quiet work. That single-act burial decides whether the story ends or begins again, millions of years later. The Nemegt's channel-bars ridges of sand and gravel built inside the rivers themselves were natural traps for bones. When floodwaters lost speed, they dropped their heavy cargo first, branches, pebbles, carcasses. Bones rolled and lodged in hollows interlocked like driftwood. Over time, new floods laid fresh layers above them, packing sediment tighter and tighter until bone turned to mineral skeleton to sculpture. In these channels, paleontologists today find entire animals preserved mid-chaos. Tarbosaurus skulls twisted by current Dinosaurus ribs flattened into ripples, even nests sealed intact beneath ancient sandbanks. But the floodplains told subtler stories. Here, away from the main current, the waters spread thin and slow, leaving behind a veneer of fine mud. When dinosaurs crossed these surfaces, herds of Saurolophus lone Tarchia, even sprinting Allosaurus, their feet pressed into the wet sediment. The next flood filled those tracks with silt. The next drought baked them into clay. Millions of years later, the impressions remain, each one a heartbeat frozen in stone. Some trackways still show direction depth, and even pauses a record of hesitation of breath. Other fossils came from the drought pits, those cruel intervals between rains when rivers shrank into ponds and death gathered at the edges. Here carcasses dried, cracked and fell apart, only to be buried when the rains returned. That alternation, desiccation and flood exposure and burial produced fossils of exquisite detail. Skin impressions, feathers, even stomach contents have survived because of this cycle of extremes. What the flood buried, the drought refined. To the trained eye, every layer of the Nemegt is a sentence in a buried narrative. Coarse sandstone, a riverbed in motion. Fine siltstone, a floodplain breathing between seasons, red clay. The mark of oxidation under a desert sun. Each colour, texture and mineral trace acts like a word in the Earth's own language. Paleontologists read it with the patience of translators deciphering scripture. When they split open these rocks, the past appears in fragments, a claw gleaming where none should be, a tooth lodged beside a fossilized fern. These juxtapositions are not accidents. They are the byproducts of geography and chance. A predator dies near a stream, its bones scattered by flood mingling with those of prey. A plant's roots grow through the sediment, leaving carbon ghosts that frame the skeleton like a natural border. Layer upon layer, the basin writes its palimpsest of existence. Sometimes even absence tells the story. A missing limb in a skeleton might mean scavengers or currents too strong. A crushed ribcage hints at overburden from centuries of compression. Scientists reconstruct these moments like forensic detectives, reversing the timeline from bone to being. They don't just ask, what species is this? They ask, how did this creature come to rest here? The Nemegt's genius lies in its contradictions, a place both gentle and brutal where abundance and catastrophe wove together to create preservation. Its rivers erased as much as they saved, yet what they saved completely. Even delicate eggshells, fish scales and leaf veins remain intact under layers of stone. The same floods that killed millions also made them immortal. Picture it now in cross-section, the Gobi Desert sliced open like a cake of time. At the bottom, dark grey mudstones mark the humid marshes where Dinosaurus waded. Above them, ochre sands tell of shifting rivers that trapped Tarbosaurus in their flow. Higher still, the pale dusts of the drought. Layers brittle as bone preserve the tracks of migrating herds. Each stratum is not merely rock, but time itself made visible. When paleontologists kneel at these sites, brushes in hand, they are reading not bare bones, but behaviours, rivers that moved bodies, that sank winds that sculpted silence. To the casual eye it's dirt, to them its motion stopped mid-breath. In this way, the Nemeg Formation is not just a fossil bed, it is a memory field. It doesn't preserve life at random, but according to rules written by physics, weather and chance. Those rules determine what survives the ages and what is erased. And so the world we see through the fossils is both truth and illusion, a selective portrait painted by mud and water. Yet what a portrait it is. In its layered pages we glimpse the pulse of ecosystems long gone, herds crossing floodplains, predators chasing through reeds, the first raindrops after years of drought. Here history and geology become the same thing, threads in the mud woven together until life itself becomes sediment. And someday, long after we are gone, the same earth may do for us what it once did for them, take our bones, our dust, our forgotten traces, and write another story. The camps, the flags, the finds. Long before the Nemeg became a name whispered with awe in documentaries, it was simply a stretch of desert, silent, endless and dangerous. To those who crossed it, the wind felt like memory itself, whispering of things buried beyond reach. But in the early 20th century, that silence was broken by the crackle of radios, the flutter of canvas, and the sound of spades striking stone. Humanity had come not to conquer, but to listen. The story of the Nemeg's rediscovery begins with the age of expedition, when paleontology was as much an act of exploration as of science. In the 1920s, Roy Chapman Andrews and his American teams from the American Museum of Natural History journeyed across Mongolia's southern deserts, their caravans stretching for miles, camels, trucks, crates, tents, and hope. Their goal was simple yet impossible: to find the origins of life itself. They unearthed the first dinosaur eggs ever discovered, proof that the Earth could keep its secrets for 100 million years and still yield them to persistence. But it wasn't until decades later in the 1960s that the Polish-Mongolian expeditions brought the Nemeg's buried empire into sharper focus. These were not colonial adventures, but collaborations, a remarkable scientific partnership between two nations rebuilding their identities in the shadow of war. The camps they established at the base of the cliffs became microcosms of shared purpose. Polish geologists sketching layers by lantern light, Mongolian guides navigating dunes by the stars, translators laughing over black tea as sandstorms howled outside their tents. Each dawn the camp unfurled like a living map, flags rising above the desert wind, notebooks filling with sketches of bones half exposed in crimson rock. They named the formations Bain Zak Togrugian Shari Nemegt, not merely as coordinates but as acts of reverence. The fossils they uncovered were not just specimens, they were survivors of time. It was in this crucible of cooperation that one of the most haunting mysteries in paleontology was born: the discovery of a pair of gigantic forelimbs buried alone in the sediment, unattached to any known body. Each arm was 8 feet long, ending in enormous claws curved like sabers. The creature they belonged to was unlike anything else known to science. In 1965, Zofia Kielan-Jaworowska, the leader of the Polish-Mongolian expedition, held a press briefing under a canvas awning as wind swept across the dunes. With measured awe, she introduced the world to a new genus, Dinosaurus mirificus, the marvelous terrible hand. But that was all anyone had: arms, claws, and questions. For decades, Dinosaurus became a ghost in textbooks, an unfinished sentence. Artists imagined it as a monstrous predator, a super raptor with talons that could shred sauropods. Others proposed it was a carrion feeder or a scavenger of corpses left by Tarbosaurus. The arms hung in museum halls like prophecies inviting more imagination than understanding. For nearly 50 years, no skull, no tail, no torso was ever found. Only those two limbs reaching out of prehistory, demanding an ending. Then in the 2000s, that ending finally came. A Korean-Mongolian team working in the same desert that had humbled so many before uncovered new fossils that would complete the picture. The skeleton they unearthed was unlike anything expected: a hulking pot-bellied creature with a duck-like bill, a sailback spine, and long forelimbs built not for killing but for foraging. Inside its ribcage, paleontologists found gastrolith stones used for grinding plant matter, and even fish bones, proof that Dinosaurus was an omnivore, not a predator. The terrible hand was not the weapon of a killer, but the tool of a survivor. In a poetic twist, one of the skeletons had been stolen before it could be studied, smuggled out of Mongolia and scattered through the black market. Years later, through an extraordinary collaboration between scientists, collectors and governments, the missing bones were recovered and repatriated. Piece by piece, the body of Dinosaurus was rebuilt not just in museums, but in the shared conscience of the scientific world. When the final reconstruction was unveiled with its wide, smiling beak and improbable proportions, it seemed almost to laugh at the decades of misunderstanding. The mystery that had begun with a pair of claws ended with a revelation of gentleness, a reminder that science, like evolution, sometimes takes the long way home. Today, the facts that once fluttered over the desert camps have faded, but their spirit endures in a new generation of collaboration. Mongolian scientists lead excavations alongside international teams unearthing fossils with GPS and drones, where once only compass and instinct guided the way. The desert that once divided nations now unites them in curiosity. Every find is a continuation of that lineage. The footsteps of Andrews, Keelan, Jaworowska, Barsbold, Kobayashi, and the countless local workers whose names rarely reached the papers but whose hands uncovered eternity. Each discovery reminds us that the Namex is not only a fossil bed, it is a human story of persistence, patience, and partnership. At night, when the wind sweeps across the campsites, the dunes whisper through the empty tents, carrying the echoes of laughter, the clink of rock hammers, the shuffling of brushes on stone. The desert remembers every hand that touched its bones, and perhaps somewhere beneath the next ridge another mystery waits, not for the most powerful nation or the best technology, but for the next group of humans willing to kneel in the dust under the same indifferent stars and ask softly, what came before us? Seasons of plenty. Seasons of fear. The Nemeg was never one thing, it was a stage in constant transformation, a land of cycles where every triumph contained its undoing and every death sowed the next generation's survival. To live here was to move with the rhythm of the earth itself, flood and drought, growth and famine, stillness and storm. When the rains came, the desert forgot itself. The rivers swelled into serpents of silver, racing across the floodplains and braiding into deltas that glimmered like veins under sunlight. The air grew heavy with humidity, the ground dark and alive. Ferns unfurled, cycads glittered with dew, and dragonflies the size of sparrows stitched patterns over the water. For a few short months, the Nemegt was a paradise, and paradise was noisy. Herds of Sarolophus gathered by the hundreds, their calls echoing like brass horns through the mist. The forest edges quivered with movement as Herrerasaurus reached for fresh shoots, its claws slicing delicately through branches. The Deinachira, slow but unhurried, waded through flooded shallows, plusking river plants and fish in equal measure. Above Asdarkheed, pterosaurs soared low, their shadows gliding over the surface of still pools, scanning for movement, the living and the dying alike. For a time, there was abundance enough for all. Even the Tarbosaurus rulers of the dry months turned patient during the rains. They watched from higher ground bellies, full conserving energy as prey dispersed. The predators thrived not through chaos, but through discipline, a quiet understanding that hunger, postponed today, would mean strength tomorrow. The wet season brought courtship and risk. Colours brightened feathers and crests took on iridescent sheen and the air hummed with displays. Male homolocephala clashed their flat skulls together in ritual duels, dull thuds carrying through the reeds like tribal drums. Herds of Nemegtosaurus migrated along the rejuvenated corridors, mothers lowing softly as their calves took first uncertain steps through mud that still remembered last year's bones. And then, inevitably, the pendulum swung back. When the rains ended, the rivers broke apart into fragments. Pools shrank, algae dried to crust, and the smell of rot thickened in the heat. The land reasserted its authority. Water that had been mercy became memory. Now the rules changed, the patient became the powerful. Tarkia, the armoured, clever one, moved from shade to shade, drinking, rarely feeding on the coarse, dry shrubs that others ignored. His armour gleamed under the sun, deflecting heat like a mirror. It was not fast, but it was steady, and steadiness was victory. The Eoraptor prowled the twilight margins, a slender tyrannosaur adapted for speed over strength. When the rivers withdrew, its time began. It stalked the thirsty herds, striking at the edges, never challenging the giants, but feasting on their losses. Its cousin, the Bagara-Aten, slipped through the brush, hunting smaller prey in silence, its speed now an advantage where the world had slowed. And in the dark, when even the wind paused to listen, Adasaurus emerged, eyes reflecting the starlight, claws, paws flexing in the dust. It hunted by sound, by scent, by pulse. Its prey, the homolocephala, learned to live by the same senses. They moved in synchrony, hearts beating to a single rhythm of flight and return. Predator and prey were no longer enemies, they were partners in precision. each sharpening the other with every encounter. From above, the Azhdarchids watched the land's transformation gliding over carcasses left behind in the mud. They were the constant scavengers when the rivers rose, opportunists when they fell. Their long shadows crossed the Tarbosaurus' domain, indifferent to hierarchy, their wings etching time's slow spiral across the sky. The Deinocheirus too adjusted. During drought, it followed the ghost of water underground, feeding in marshes that remained only as whispers, digging with its long arms into mud still damp beneath the crust. In the hardest seasons, its omnivorous appetite became salvation. It was not the fastest nor the fiercest, but it was adaptable, and adaptability, not size, was the key to eternity. Each cycle reshuffled the board. The floodplain that favoured the hadrosaurs one month belonged to the predators the next. The scrubland that seemed dead after the drought became a nursery once the rain returned. No species ruled the Nemegict forever, only change did. From this rhythm emerged an ecosystem not of domination but of balance. Each creature occupied its brief window of fortune, the lush months for the grazers, the lean months for the hunters, the in-between for the scavengers. To survive was not to conquer, but to anticipate. And in that endless loop of feast and famine, the Nemeg became more than a landscape, it became a lesson. Life here was a choreography of endurance, where every movement was a negotiation between hunger and hope. The rains will come again. They always do. The rivers will swell, the air will shimmer, and the plains will pulse with the heartbeat of giants once more. But even in the season of plenty, the bones beneath the soil will whisper their reminder. Nothing lasts forever. Not the floods, not the droughts, not even the kings. Only the rhythm endures. The last light on the river. Evening falls for the last time on the Nemeg. The air glows with the fading warmth of day, turning the cliffs to copper, and the river, what little remains of it, to glass. The sun sinks low, slow and deliberate, gilding every ripple, every grain of sand. In the distance something moves, a column of dust, a faint call carried across the water. Then silence again. The landscape exhales. What remains now are gestures, not voices. The Azhdarchids drift on overhead, their wings tracing slow arcs across the dying light, their shadow sweeping over the river like memories that refuse to settle. They circle once, twice, and then vanish into the dimming sky, leaving only the whisper of wind. Along the banks, tracks glisten, impressions of feet that will never walk again. Some belong to hadrosaurs, broad and gentle, others to predators, sharp and decisive. A single line of ankylosaur prints, heavy and deep, cuts through the mud toward the horizon. Within hours, the water will recede further, and by morning dust will settle into them. Yet for now they gleam under the sunset constellations pressed into Earth stars turned downward. The forest beyond the floodplain is quiet, its leaves barely stirring. The Herrerasaurus that once gardened here has vanished into the shadows. The Tarkia, the slow thinker with the heavy tail, rests under a ledge, its armour cooling in the evening air. The Tarbosaurus lies sated beside the bones of its kill eyelids, heavy, the great chest rising and falling in the rhythm of the ancient world's sleep. And through it all runs the river, narrow now but still alive. It carries fragments of leaves, shells and bones winding slowly through the dark. Every curve of its course writes another layer of sediment, another future fossil. It is not just water, it is time liquefied. The camera lingers on the surface where ripples reflect the last embers of day. For a moment the water looks like fire, as if the world were burning itself gently into memory. Then the light shifts and the illusion dissolves. Above, faint bird song breaks the stillness, fragile, pure. It is not the roar of a predator or the bellow of a giant, but the voice of what endured. The descendants of those long-vanished lineages still fill the scarpe with their music, carrying echoes of the age that came before. Every flutter of a sparrow, every heron's glide is the continuation of a story written in feathers long before the first human saw the stars. The camera pulls back one final time. The basin stretches outward, an ocean of silence under a purple scale. The footprints, the bones, the rivers all seem to glow faintly, as if aware of their own impermanence. The desert that once devoured giants has become their archive, and in its patience lies the most enduring truth. Nothing survives forever, yet nothing truly vanishes. The Nemeg sleeps now, not dead, only waiting. Beneath the sand, the bones hold their breath for another 1,000,000 years, until curious hands uncover them again. And when that happens, the river will flow once more, not with water, but with memory. The wind stirs, the light fades, and the last reflections on the river's skin dim to black. Somewhere unseen, a bird lifts off into the twilight a living fragment of thunder that once walked, and as the screen fades to silence we are left with that image. A single footprint filling with water catching the last light of the sun. A memory preserved not in stone but in the act of being remembered. What the desert still tells us. The camera returns to the Gobi of today, a land of wind stars and silence. At first glance it seems empty, but the longer you look, the more it speaks. The dunes shimmer under the afternoon sun, and in the distance a cluster of felt yurts rises like white shells against the amber horizon. Smoke curls from their roofs. The same land that once cradled giants now shelters herders and their flocks, creatures no larger than the shadows of those ancient feet. By day the nomads move slowly across the plains, following the rhythms of their animals, reading the same sky their ancestors did. They know where the wind carves shelter, where the rare wells hide under the sand. When they rest, their camels kneel beside stones streaked with fossil bone, the past and present sharing the same ground. At night they tell stories beside the fire tales of thunder lizards and sky dragons of bones that glow under moonlight. To them, the fossils are not relics. They are echoes of the earth remembering itself. And above them the stars fall a meteor shower, scattering sparks over the same basin where once rivers branched and dinosaurs drank. For a few fleeting seconds the desert glows with the same elemental fire that birthed the world. Time collapses into a single luminous moment. In the morning the light finds a new camp, not of herders but of scientists. Their tents flap against the wind flags, snapping in the same gusts that once buried bones and built dunes. Kneeling in the dust, a paleontologist runs a fine brush across a fragment of vertebra. The gesture is small, reverent. What was once flesh and sinew is now mineral. Yet in that mineral lies a pulse, the rhythm of the ancient Nemeg still alive in stone. As the camera draws closer, we see her pause. Around her the desert hums with quiet life larks darting between tufts of grass, beetles tracing furrows in the sand. This is not a wasteland. It is a living archive where every grain holds the residue of deep time. The same processes that once preserved dinosaurs now preserve seeds, tracks, and the bones of small mammals that will one day tell our story. What then does this land still tell us? That adaptation, not power, decides survival. The Nemeg's inhabitants flourished not by conquering their world, but by listening to it, adjusting, enduring, waiting. Whether predator or prey, giant or small, every species here learned the same lesson, that stability is an illusion, and the only constant is change. It tells us that diversity is not decoration but design. From the towering sauropods to the nimble raptors, from plant-eating giants to opportunistic omnivores, every niche mattered. Each filled a gap in the ecosystems, breathing a single note in the planet's long symphony of balance. When one fell silent, others adapted to take its place. Life never stopped. It only changed key. And it tells us that time itself is an ecosystem. The riverbeds that once drowned herds now cradle their fossils. The drought pits that once killed are the reason we know they lived. Every erosion is revelation. Every storm is an editor. The earth is still writing in rock, in sand, in us. As the wind rises again, the scientist leans back, eyes narrowing against the glare. Her brush rests beside the bone. In the far distance, a herd of camels moves slowly along a ridge, their silhouettes nearly indistinguishable from those of the long-necked creatures that once crossed this same horizon. The world, it seems, remembers its shapes. The camera tilts upward. The desert gives way to the sky, endless and clear. The same constellations that once shone on Tarbosaurus and Dinosaurs still burn there tonight, but now they shine on us. Because the story of the Nemegt is not about extinction. It is about continuity, the persistence of motion, adaptation, and memory. Every bird that lifts from the Gobi, every ripple of sand under the wind is part of the same unbroken current that began when the world was young. So when you next walk beside a river, or hear the cry of a bird at dusk, remember this place where rivers remembered giants and deserts remembered rain. Look closely and you'll see the same pattern running through everything life-changing, form never purpose. The dinosaurs are gone, but the world they made still breathes. And if you listen, truly listen, you can still hear it. The desert is speaking. It always has been. It always will.